A continent of immense beauty, resources and potential. From the vast savannas teeming with wildlife to the dense rainforests that breathe life into the planet, Africa is a land of contrasts and wonders, but also a land scarred by exploitation and a history of foreign interference. The echoes of colonization still reverberate through its lands, leaving behind a legacy of division and strife. Today, a new scramble is underway. This time, it's not just about land or resources, but something perhaps even more valuable: strategic influence and control over future pathways of development. Nations are vying for a foothold in Africa, each with its own agenda and vision for the continent's future. Across the continent, foreign military bases are being established, expanded, and in some cases dismantled. These bases serve as the front lines in a geopolitical chess game where every move is calculated for maximum advantage. This is the story of that struggle, a story of shifting alliances, competing interests, and the impact on the people caught in the middle. Military bases are more than just strategic points. They are symbols of power and influence. They're like the studio apartments of international relations, compact, often cramped, but strategically located to serve a specific purpose. These outposts are the nerve centers of military operations, where every decision can have far-reaching consequences. And just like a good apartment, everyone wants one in the best neighborhood. The competition is fierce and the stakes are high. Except in this case, the neighborhood is Africa, and the landlords are a mix of old colonial powers and ambitious newcomers. The dynamics are complex and the players are many. We're talking about countries like France, the old guard trying to hold on to its historical influence. France's presence is a reminder of its colonial past and its ongoing interests in the region. Then you have the United States, always keen on projecting power in the name of, you guessed it, fighting terrorism. The US sees Africa as a critical front in its global strategy, with bases in countries like Cameroon, Djibouti, Kenya, Seychelles and Somalia. Let's not forget China, the rising dragon spreading its wings and challenging the established order. China's investments and military presence are reshaping the geopolitical landscape. Russia is also vying for a military presence with its Wagner Group activities in Africa. It's described as a private military company and as a network of mercenaries. In the Central African Republic, Russia's support has enabled state forces to retake territory from rebel groups accompanied by abuses. And of course, India quietly building its presence in the Indian Ocean. India's approach is more subtle but no less significant. But here's the thing about this new scramble. It's not just about military might. Diplomacy and economic ties are equally important in this complex game. It's not just about military might, it's about trade, resources, and securing those all-important shipping lanes. Control over these elements can dictate the future of global commerce. It's about trade, resources, and securing those all-important shipping lanes. Africa's natural wealth is a magnet for foreign interests, each seeking to carve out their share. It's about projecting power and influence in a region that's increasingly becoming the center of the world's attention. The future of Africa is being shaped by these external forces, for better or worse. And as with any scramble, there are winners and losers. The benefits and burdens of this new competition are unevenly distributed. The question is, who will they be? The answer will shape the destiny of a continent and its people. Let's start with France, shall we? A nation with a storied history of colonialism and influence, particularly in Africa. The country that once held sway over much of West Africa is now in retreat mode. This shift marks a significant change in the geopolitical landscape of the region. After years of battling jihadist groups in the Sahel region, France decided to pack up its toys and go home. The decision was not made lightly, as it followed years of intense military engagement. Well, not quite home. And more like regrouping in other parts of the continent. Remember Operation Barkhane? It was France's largest overseas military operation, France's big anti-terrorism operation in the Sahel. It was launched in 2014 with the aim of combating Islamist militants across the region. Yeah, about that, turns out it wasn't as effective as advertised. Despite the initial successes, the operation faced numerous challenges. After years of fighting, spending billions of euros and losing many soldiers, France realized it wasn't winning any hearts and minds. The human and financial costs were staggering. In fact, it was achieving the opposite. The local populations grew increasingly resentful of the foreign military presence. Anti-French sentiment was on the rise, fueled by perceptions of neo-colonialism and a sense that France was more interested in protecting its own interests than helping the people of the Sahel. This sentiment was not just limited to the Sahel, but was echoed across various parts of Africa. So, in 2022, France started withdrawing its troops from Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. This marked the beginning of a significant shift in France's military strategy in Africa. It was a humiliating blow for a country that once prided itself on its African sphere of influence. The withdrawal was seen as an admission of failure, and it wasn't just the Sahel. The ripple effects of this decision were felt far and wide. In 2024, Senegal and Ivory Coast, two long-standing allies, also announced the closure of French military bases on their soil. This was a clear indication of the changing dynamics in the region. The message was clear: thanks, but no thanks. We'll handle our own security from now on. African nations were asserting their sovereignty and independence. This wave of base closures marked a turning point in France's relationship with Africa. It signaled the end of an era of French military dominance in the region. The old colonial power was being shown the door and a new era was dawning. An era where African nations were taking control of their own destinies. An era where African nations were no longer content with being pawns in someone else's game. They were ready to chart their own course, free from the shadows of their colonial past. As France recalibrates its strategy in Africa, another major player is stepping into the vacuum: Russia. Over the past decade, Russia has been quietly but steadily increasing its military presence across the continent. This isn't the Cold War-era Soviet Union flexing its ideological muscles. Instead, it's modern Russia, driven by a mix of strategic interests and economic opportunities. Russia's approach is multifaceted. On one hand, it's providing direct military support to governments facing internal conflicts. Take the Central African Republic, for example. Russian military advisors and private military contractors, often referred to as mercenaries, are training local forces and even participating in combat operations. This assistance has been pivotal in bolstering the Kar government's fight against rebel groups. In return, Russia has secured lucrative mining concessions, gaining access to the country's rich mineral resources. But it's not just about boots on the ground. Russia is also forging military alliances and signing defense agreements with various African nations. Countries like Sudan, Mozambique and Madagascar have all inked deals with Moscow, allowing for military cooperation and the sale of Russian arms. These agreements are part of a broader strategy to expand Russia's influence and counter Western dominance in the region. What's driving this Russian push into Africa? Several factors are at play. First, there's the desire to project power on the global stage. By establishing a presence in Africa, Russia can demonstrate its ability to influence events far beyond its immediate neighborhood. Then there's the economic angle. Access to Africa's vast natural resources, from oil and gas to precious metals, is a significant motivator. Finally, there's the geopolitical chessboard. By strengthening ties with African nations, Russia can gain allies in international forums like the United Nations, where every vote counts. However, Russia's involvement in Africa is not without controversy. The presence of Russian mercenaries has raised concerns about human rights abuses and the destabilizing impact of foreign military interventions. Critics argue that Russia's actions are driven more by self-interest than genuine support for African sovereignty. This has led to a mixed reception among African populations, with some welcoming the assistance and others viewing it with suspicion. As Russia deepens its footprint in Africa, the geopolitical landscape continues to evolve. The continent, once a battleground for colonial powers, is now a theater for new forms of influence and competition. In this complex and dynamic environment, African nations are navigating a delicate balance, seeking to leverage external partnerships while safeguarding their own autonomy and interests. The new scramble for Africa is well underway, and Russia is determined to be a key player in this unfolding drama. But hold on a second. Before we write France off completely, let's not forget that it still has a significant military presence in Africa. Sure, they've packed up shop in some places, but they're still clinging on in others. It's like that guest who overstays their welcome but keeps finding excuses to stick around. Djibouti, that tiny but strategically located country on the Horn of Africa, remains a key outpost for the French military. Camp Lemonnier, the US base, might get all the attention, but France's military base is no slouch either. It's a vital hub for counter-terrorism operations and provides France with a strategic foothold in a region that's increasingly important for global trade and security. But France is also trying to adapt to the changing times. Instead of maintaining large, permanent bases, it's shifting towards a more flexible approach. Think joint military exercises, training programs for African forces, and setting up military academies. It's all part of a strategy to maintain some level of influence without being seen as a colonial power clinging to the past. The big question is, will it work? Can France reinvent itself as a partner and ally rather than a patronizing overlord? Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure, France's days of dictating terms to its former colonies are over. The new scramble for Africa requires a more nuanced approach, one that recognizes the agency and aspirations of African nations. The American behemoth, Camp Lemonnier and beyond. Now let's talk about the elephant, or should I say the eagle in the room. The United States, the self-proclaimed leader of the free world, also has a sizable military footprint in Africa. And when I say sizable, I mean they've got enough firepower on the continent to make even the most battle-hardened warlord blush. Their crown jewel? Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. This sprawling base, conveniently located near some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, is a testament to America's enduring love affair with military might. Officially, it's all about fighting terrorism and promoting regional stability. But let's be honest, folks. When you've got a base that big, in a region that's strategically important, you're not just there to hand out pamphlets on democracy. But Camp Lemonnier is just the tip of the iceberg. The US has been busy bees, setting up smaller outposts and partnering with local militaries across the continent. From training programs in Somalia to drone bases in Niger, they're spreading their wings far and wide. Of course, this has raised eyebrows, with some critics accusing the US of militarizing Africa and fueling instability. But the Americans, they've got a response for everything. They argue that their presence is vital for countering terrorism, promoting democracy, and protecting American interests. It's a familiar tune, but one that's becoming increasingly discordant in a world where the old rules no longer apply. Beyond the military operations, the US also engages in various humanitarian efforts, aiming to win hearts and minds. They provide medical assistance, build infrastructure, and support local communities. Diplomatic efforts are also in full swing, with American officials frequently meeting African leaders to discuss mutual interests and regional security. Joint military exercises and training programs are a common sight, as the US aims to bolster the capabilities of African forces. The logistics behind these operations are immense, involving complex supply chains and strategic planning to ensure everything runs smoothly. As the sun sets over Camp Lemonnier, one can't help but reflect on the profound impact of this military presence. It's a multifaceted endeavor, blending hard power with soft diplomacy, all under the watchful eye of the American eagle. The dragons reach China's first outpost. Next up, we've got China, the new kid on the block, but one that's quickly making its presence felt. Forget about panda diplomacy and those win-win trade deals. China's playing chess, my friends, and they're thinking several moves ahead. In 2017, China did something it had never done before. It established its first overseas military base. And where did they choose to plant their flag? Djibouti, of course. That tiny country is quickly becoming the hottest piece of real estate in the military base game. China's base, located just a stone's throw from Camp Lemonnier, sent shockwaves through the international community. It was a clear sign that China was stepping up its game, challenging US dominance and ready to protect its growing interests in the region. But China's ambitions go beyond just securing shipping lanes. They're investing heavily in infrastructure projects across Africa, building ports, railways and roads. It's all part of their Belt and Road Initiative, a grand plan to connect China to the rest of the world. Some see it as a new form of colonialism, with China using debt trap diplomacy to gain leverage over African nations. Others argue that China is simply offering a viable alternative to Western dominance. Whatever your take, one thing is clear: China's arrival on the African stage is a game changer. In conclusion, the rise of military bases across Africa and the world signifies a strategic shift that demands our attention. Stay informed and watch with caution. Subscribe for more in-depth analyses. Thanks for watching.